Now, Nigeria's Tax Ombuds is set to unveil a Taxpayers Rights Charter aimed at strengthening taxpayer protection and improving confidence in the country's tax system. Now, the development comes as the Nigeria Revenue Service also maintains the 1st of this month deadline for businesses to comply with its national e-invoicing mandate, while 16 states have adopted a harmonized tax framework to curb multiple taxation and improve the ease of doing business. Oladejo, Associate Director, Commercial Practice at Anderson, Nigeria, joins me now for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Oladejo. Quite an interesting tale we have here in our story. But let's talk about how significant this Taxpayers' Rights Charter is for our local ecosystem and how this fits into the elephant in the room, trust.
Thanks so much for having me, David. Of course, I made partner a couple of months ago.
Congratulations.
You know, I know that you probably usually forget that. Yes. But in terms of the trust issue, the trust deficit is a problem that has plagued our nation, you know, for a very long time. And it's not surprising that the Office of the Ombuds is attacking the issue, you know, from there, bringing agencies together, you know, agencies that would have significant roles to play, you know, when it comes to assisting to boost everything relating to that trust. Trust is going to play a significant role because the function of the Office of the Ombudsman is very pivotal. Pivotal in the sense that it is expected that taxpayers are able to approach the office, get resolution before even going to the tax appeal tribunal. You know, so if taxpayers can't trust that entire system, it becomes very difficult to even achieve the objective for which that office has been set to achieve. So, like you mentioned, trust is very key. It's a very key component of what the Office of the Ombuds is meant to achieve in order for them to get the desired results, you know, within our taxing framework.
Yes, but when we also look at what this framework also seeks to do, greater voluntary tax compliance, especially among SMEs as well and individuals who have traditionally been wary of the tax system, but how much of compliance do you still think this will be able to drive?
It will drive significant amount of compliance because once taxpayers trust the system, it helps to voluntarily, it helps the drive towards voluntary compliance, you know, and that is because where confusion is in the room, whether they are confused about the implication of a particular provision or they don't agree with the way the tax administrators are interpreting those provisions, they can always, you know, approach the office to get clarification. Now, this charter that is being developed, the office had mentioned that it's already concluded. You know, they are just seeking harmony from the Ministry of Finance and from the presidency. And that harmony is very important because you don't want a situation where the office would say something and then it will be the framework towards implementing that stuff, you know, that has been said would be lacking. You know, so once you have that concurrence across board, you know, what you would see is even taxpayers like the SMEs that you mentioned that would otherwise have struggled with interpreting particular provision of the tax law, once they know that there is certainty as to what their expectation is, definitely voluntary compliance will be strengthened.
Yes, and talking about compliance and deadlines as well now, it's barely 4 days to the e-invoicing deadline here. Yeah. But talking about the deadline is one thing, but the volume of people who would be able to get onboarded, because we're having a conversation behind the cameras. Q1, we had 1,000. Q2, if we see another 1,000 or 2,000, but there's still a large chunk that might likely not meet this compliance deadline. What sort of picture do you think will play out in the next few days?
Thanks for that question. I think what we are experiencing with this deadline issue is the fact that Nigeria is beginning to see that new definition in tax social contracts, right, where there is certainty as to what to expect. The NRS is also trying to show that we are going to be firm with this deadline, regardless of what it is looking like, because like you mentioned, there are about estimated maybe about 5,000 corporates that fall within the category, and this deadline basically relates to large taxpayers, those that have revenue above 5 billion in naira. So what is expected is that, of course, registration, at some point the emphasis was on registration, just register. Now the service is saying that you should register, you should get on board, and you should start facilitating transmission of invoices on the merchant buyer solution. Quite frankly, it's going to be tough to get all corporates onboarded because there would certainly have been certain challenges that some companies would have encountered in the process of getting onboarded, and that's why the service had been saying get on board, since the time that they've been making this noise, so that if you have some peculiarities within your framework, whether your ERP or whatever it is, you can engage with the relevant parties and then they can assist you in solving that. But now the service wants to wield the big stick, by sticking to the 31st July deadline, and we can only see how that would pan out.
Fingers crossed on how things to pan out. But let's also look at the scenario whereby this goes beyond the large taxpayers now, even looking at smaller businesses, the scenario whereby they're also required to adopt such e-invoicing framework as well. Now, what sort of lessons should we then policymakers take from this particular process, and then in terms of adjustments and a smoother transition?
I think what is important and quite instructive in this kind of situation is to acknowledge the fact that this is not just a technology project. This is a project that cuts across technology, finance, tax, and a whole lot of, players within that value chain. So if we take it from there, we also have to look at the commercial side of things. So for compliance sake, companies may be getting on board, but this category of companies you are talking about, you have a lot more of them. They contribute significantly to the GDP of the country. So we would have to put certain things in place that would make getting, onboarding rather seamless for them, because they may not have the capacity of the big guns, the big ticket, companies that can, chest significant amount of cost and perhaps any disruption that this technology may be bringing on board. So they would have to put things in place to ensure that compliance fits into their own language, such that it will not be practically difficult or impossible for them to get on board, that chain.
And irrespective of the challenges ahead, it's still a phased framework, so I'm sure there will be definitely adjustments going through. But let's talk about now 16 states adopting the harmonized taxes and the levies framework. Once again, issues around multiple taxation. Would you say this is a milestone we should be celebrating? 16 out of the 36?
I think yes, because what it shows is there is improvement. At some point, we were in 11. At some point, we were even struggling with. Because you see, one thing is to have the law. The other thing is the acceptance of it. This signals that as the as the Joint Revenue Board is making effort to ensure everyone accepts that framework, there is improvement. And that's why you see these numbers being reeled out, so that other states that have not come on board, I'm sure they are also making plans, fine-tuning things here and there to ensure that there is total acceptance. Definitely at the time the reforms were concluded, every practitioner, or everyone who has followed the story had known that the magic isn't going to happen overnight, right? Because say what you like, some people have printed revenue receipt for the whole of 2026, and the law is coming to say multiple taxes that have subsisted for a while should now be shrunk to about just 9, So that harmonization is important, and that's what we are seeing playing out here. So I think it's a right step in the right direction, and it signals that there's an acceptance and there's improvement in that number. And I hope that continues in that trajectory.
And this will definitely reflect big when we're looking at IGRs for subnationals.
For the subnationals, absolutely.
Beyond IGR, I was going to ask if the sort of strategies when we're looking at maintaining business-friendly tax environment. But if you could just be succinct now, why that should still remain a core in this mix?
It should be a core because if you look at where we're coming from multiple taxes of over 60, I think the fiscal committee had highlighted over 60 of them, and you didn't have certainty as to what we apply in what states. Now, this would improve the business friendliness because you then know that once a state has adopted the framework, these are the taxes at the states, at the subnational level and at the local level that the business, can actually pay. So I think this issue of business friendliness would become even more measurable by reason of the adoption of this framework that becomes universal, that may become universal for all of the states, because that's actually our expectation.
Yes. Oladejo, thank you so much for your time. That was Oladejo, partner at Anderson, Nigeria.